Today we are going to continue talking about central message. The story we are going to be reading is Sharing the Crops. So when we are doing this skill, we are recounting stories to include fables, folktales, and myths from different and diverse cultures to determine the central message, lesson, or moral, and explain how it is conveyed through key details in a text. So remember, when we are determining the central message, we are using the key details and events of a story to figure out the central message or lesson that the author wants to share with readers. Many stories have central message or lessons the author wants to share. The story teaches the lesson through characters, the events that happen, and what the character learns. As you read, look at the key details will help you find the central message and understand what you are reading. So when we're determining the central message, a lot of times we're talking about the sequence of events that happen in a story. So one thing leads to another, which generally there's a problem and the characters come across a solution. And when they find that solution, there's a lot of times a message or lesson behind it, right? Before we've talked about the boy who cried wolf, and the events were him crying wolf, wolf. There was no wolf. He did it again and again. Eventually, the village people never believed that there was an actual wolf. So when a wolf appeared, no one believed him and no one came to help him. So the problem was a wolf appeared and no one came. The lesson was it's not good to tell lies. So as we look at stories and we think about the events that are occurring, that leads us to what lesson the character could have learned about their actions and their feelings and how they really develop through the story. So we're going to look at this cartoon, and then we're going to think about what lesson might have happened. So we see a little boy riding a bike, and his mom's holding the back of the bike. He said, "Don't let go of me." The mom does let go. And the boy realizes, I can do it. So when we look at this, there are different events that happened in the story that lead to the message that the character could have learned. Here we see the boy is worried about riding his bike without help. How do we know that? He says to his mom, "Don't let go." In the second clip, we see the mom takes her hands off so that the boy can ride by himself. And in the third sequence of events, the boy realized that he can ride the bike without his help, without his mom's help. So when we think about these events, we can say that you can do more than you think you can would be the lesson. Try new things might be another thing someone says. So really, we look at the things that are happening and occurring in a story and think, what are we trying to learn from this? What is our takeaway? Today we are going to be reading the story Sharing the Crops. It's a folk tale from England. And while we're reading, we're going to be looking at the details that lead up to the lesson. So, once a farmer rented some land. "How much does it cost to use this land?" the farmer asked the landowner. The owner wanted to get a better part of the deal. So he said, "I'll take the top half of the crops and you can take the bottom half." But the farmer was clever. He planted potatoes because they grew in the ground. At harvest time, he gave the owner the potato tops, which are not good for anything. The owner knew he had been outsmarted. He said, "Next year, I want the bottom half of the crops." So the next year, the farmer planted oats, which grows at the top of the long grasses. The bottom half is useless, grass straw. That's what the farmer gave to the owner. This time the owner said, "Next year, I'll take the top and the bottom. You can have the middle." So, this time the farmer planted corn. At the top of this corn stalk are tassels. At the bottom are woody stalks. In the middle is where the tasty, sweet corn grows. For a third time, the owner had been outsmarted. Now it was the farmer's turn to suggest a deal. "From now on," he said, "why don't you take half of whatever I grow? Whenever I get you will get the same. This was a fair deal at last. From that day on, the owner and farmer shared the crops equally. So, when we think about this, we kind of say, why did the landowner keep changing the deal? Well, the landowner was really trying to outsmart the farmer. He wanted to take all of what the farmer produced. But the farmer knew that that wasn't fair. And he said, if he's going to try to outsmart me, I'm going to find a way to keep what I grow. So when we think about this, we know that there's a lesson somewhere in this story. And we think to ourselves, well, what is the central lesson? Well, is it wrong to try to cheat others? Never make a deal with a clever farmer. The best part of a crop is usually at the top. If a plan doesn't succeed, keep trying. Well, when we read the story, a lot of this was the landowner trying to trick the farmer. And he kept doing this over and over again. Each year, he tried to make a deal that would only benefit himself. So we can see that it is wrong to trick others. When I think about that, I then ask myself a second part of this question. When you have a part A and a part B question, you really want to focus on part A so that when you're doing part B, you're answering the question with the answer for part A in mind. So part B says, which sentence from the story best supports the answer you chose for part A? If you pick the wrong answer for part A, generally speaking, you're going to have a hard time with part B. So here we know it is wrong to try to cheat others. We now want to try to find an answer that best supports that. So once a farmer rented some land, that does not help us understand the cheating is wrong. The owner wants to get a better part of the deal. That doesn't tell us about how cheating is wrong. It is something that did happen in the story. This was a fair deal at last, or so this time the farmer planted corn. When we look at this, we can see that it was a fair deal at last is what the proper answer is. It points out that they worked something out because originally in part A, we can see that the landowner was trying to cheat the farmer, right? So if we understand that cheating is wrong, we know that eventually they made a fair deal. So when we're doing our part A's and part B's, we want to take our time and really understand that part A before we move on to the part B. So over here you can see that it says the landowner tries to cheat and outsmart the farmer. So that tells us that it's wrong to cheat. In the part B, it points out that the fair deal was made. So when we look at our key details, we're thinking about what happened in the story to lead us to this central message. You can either find the message first, or you can pull out your key details to help you support what you think the central message is. So as I read this story, I saw that it said the owner wanted to get a better deal than the farmer. So they suggested taking the crops from the top and leaving the bottom, and he kept changing it, right? Then the farmer was clever, and he planted potatoes, and he planted other things. I used the potatoes as an example, but he kept changing the crop to meet the opposite of what the landowner wanted. But when the landowner kept getting outsmarted, time and time again, the farmer and the owner came to agreement. And the lesson that was learned here was that it's wrong to cheat others, right? When you look at these details and as you read, you look for these key things that help you understand the lesson. They wanted a better deal. The harvest that he gave was not good for anything. But eventually, when we look at our last paragraph, they say that this was finally a fair deal at last. So they came to an agreement, and we can see that someone was trying to be tricky, and then a fair deal was made. So when we go and look at what the lesson of this story was, it's try not to cheat each other, because you're not going to get something out of that. When you're finding the central message, reread the story. Think about how you would feel if that was happening as well. One thing that with central message is very good is to think text to self, using those strategies that we went over at the beginning of the year. If someone was trying to trick you, you would say that that's not right, and it's not wrong to try and do that. So when you're learning central message, another really good skill to use is that text to self. Think about how you would feel and think about what you can learn or what the author is trying to convey to you. Some people want you to become a better reader and think about what you're doing. It's not about potatoes. It's not about corn. It's not about growing crops. It's about what the author is saying and what you can learn from what these two characters went through. So you are going to read a story on your own, and you're going to think about what the central message is. Think about yourself in the story, and think about what the author is trying to teach you. How can you relate it to yourself, and how can you look at these key details to help you better understand what the message is going to be? All right, get started and enjoy.